I can see your presentation, Charles. Looks great. And go ahead and begin whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you. So I'm Charles. I'm presenting on the projects in CSAFE related to footwear impression analysis. And so the overarching goal of our efforts here are to devise means to assess the strength of association between a crime scene print and a suspect shoe. So in particular, trying to gather the information that's needed to develop statistical methods in this area, the score-based likelihood ratio framework in support of footwear examination. So in the first 5 years of the CSAFE project, we've made some substantial inroads in this area. Initially, an important issue for us is being able to collect data sets. And so 2 highlights here were an effort at ISU to build a longitudinal database of outsole impression data. So this was collected by having 160 volunteers wearing pairs of shoes over a period of several months. And during that time, periodically imaging and taking test impressions of those shoes in order to see what longitudinal sort of wear patterns change over time. A second effort in this area aimed at sort of understanding the variability of tread wear at a larger scale was to collect a database of shoe outsole imagery. In this case, 200,000 images, which are retail photographs of shoe treads from 80,000 different products. And so this emphasizes the diversity of tread patterns that may be encountered. The second sort of thrust is actually developing methods to quantify feature-based comparison and matching. And so a few highlights here. So one was developing semi-automated score-based matching in order to extract features from impression evidence and make comparisons that can be calibrated probabilistically. We've also developed techniques for matching and retrieval from large collections of test impressions. And in this case, in the existing benchmarks, which have been publicly available, we've shown very good results there in terms of being able to retrieve test impressions from examples of crime scene evidence. And a final effort here has been detecting and cataloging frequency of different tread element types, again, trying to understand the statistics of class characteristics in footwear. And final project under CSAFE 1, which has concluded, was developing probabilistic models for capturing non-uniform spatial distributions of randomly acquired characteristics of racks. So this is trying to develop a better model for how racks are distributed over the surface of a shoe and understand the strength of evidence there. So going forward over the next 5 years, what are the main objectives that we're pursuing? So first is that the existing models to understand the spatial distribution of racks often rely on simplifying independence assumptions. So one of our goals is to develop and validate models that are more realistic for racks, including understanding the persistence of racks over time and the frequency with which they actually leave evidence in impression data. Second kind of limitation from our perspective is the absence of reliable, publicly available data sets that really characterize the distribution of footwear characteristics and patterns. So we're continuing to build resources around product imagery available online so that we can understand diversity of tread patterns. We also have a project underway to develop an instrument that can be deployed in public areas to passively collect images of outsoles of shoes, which we can use as data in order to estimate the frequency of footwear present in a given region and facilitate this sort of transition to a probabilistic line of thinking in terms of, say, likelihood ratios or a Bayes factor approach. And then finally, we have an ongoing effort to assemble a database of representative and simulated crime scene evidence where we actually have known ground truth in this case. And finally, we're interested in extending sort of the feature-based matching approaches that we've developed during the first phase of CSAFE to be more robust. In particular, we're interested in how to make them viable in the situation where you have partial or obscured evidence images, and understanding how to calibrate them in that scenario. And finally, a related goal is to develop evidence quality metrics for footwear impression data that are predictive of matching uncertainty. So being able to look at evidence and understand, is it good or not? What is the quality? Can we quantify that quality and be predictive of whether examiners or algorithms we've developed will be successful and reliable in matching under that scenario. So this is work carried out by several different PIs under different projects at CSAFE. So this slide outlines the existing CSAFE 2 footwear projects. The first one led by Hal Stern at UCI on the occurrence and persistence of accidental mark locations on shoe soles. A second project led by myself here also at UCI, looking at models for the generation of footwear impression evidence. Third project led by Susan Vanderplas at University of Nebraska on the characterization of footwear in local populations. And there's a fourth project jointly led by Alicia at ISU and Jacqueline Spear at our new partner at West Virginia on statistical and algorithmic approaches to analysis. And I've listed a final point here that I talk about briefly, which is an ongoing effort really across all of these groups in terms of building a publicly usable data set of simulated crime scene impression evidence. And that is taking place in collaboration with all of these PIs, as well as several outside collaborators, both folks at NIST in the footwear area, as well as others, members of the Israeli police force mentioned here at the bottom. So I'd like to just walk through each of these projects. And the first four are official CSAFE projects. The fifth one is not designated here by number, since it's a sort of ongoing proposal or pending proposal. So, so the first project is looking at occurrence and persistence of accidental mark locations on a shoe sole. And the activities that are proposed or ongoing here. First is trying to understand the reliability of rack identification, both between examiners in terms of reproducibility, but also even just questions of repeatability by a single examiner. So we want to understand which racks are reliable in this sense and reproducible. And we want to sort of do this at a fine-grained level where we really condition this on understanding the location, type, size, and shape of these marks. So in the images over here on the right, you see example annotation of racks. When will these same racks be selected by different examiners, or even by the same examiner on different days? And a piece of understanding that will be collecting data to understand differences between the racks you might observe looking at the physical shoe and those that actually leave marks behind in a crime scene print. So we could ask the question, what's the probability of observing a given rack present on the shoe at a crime scene? How does it depend on the shape, type, size, location, or other properties of the physical rack? And also, you know, important to this issue is what is the substrate where the impression is left? So how does the probability of observing that mark depend on the substrate or the quality of the trace? And a final piece of this is continuing to extend these statistical models to estimate the intensity function for rack location. So being able to predict where racks might be common or less common over the tread of a shoe and understand variabilities. And the goal here is really to assist in coming up with more accurate determinations of the value of finding a correlation between a crime scene print and a particular shoe. So this work is focused on acquired randomly acquired characteristics, accidental marks. The second project is focused on sort of understanding more about the quality of prints and how prints are formed. So the first sort of aspect of this project is to develop statistical matching models for reasoning about partial or obscured prints. We've already had some success in building tools that perform feature matching between image of crime scene evidence and an image of test impression. But we'd like to understand how reliable is that evidence as the crime scene print becomes obscured or partial. And in particular, in the understanding the role of class characteristic determination here, we'd like to really understand what is the diversity of tread patterns present, how common is a particular type of tread element repeated across different classes. So in doing this, we're in the process of generating a large-scale library of tread patterns derived from product imagery to really analyze the diversity of class characteristics in currently sold shoes. The second sort of piece of this project is to push into trying to develop a better understanding of relating the three-dimensional shape of tread to actual impression evidence. So one piece of this involves scanning treads at high resolution. So you see a visualization over here on the right, and then developing models for estimating the contact surface and the likelihood of particular impression patterns as a function of that 3D shape. And we're also attempting to leverage this idea to be able to incorporate information from commercial tread imagery, in particular because there's so many thousands of new shoe products that appear each month. It's not feasible to scan every one of them ourselves, but through this commercial imagery, we can acquire lots of useful information about that. And so the figure on the top is showing a translation of a commercial image into an estimate of contact surface. And the goal here is really developing a better understanding of the reliability of impression evidence. And we also hope to ultimately provide assistive tools for automatically searching databases of tread patterns and calibrating reliability. So the third project is looking at characterization of footwear in local populations. And this is an important question if we're considering the possibility that the crime scene print is left by some other shoe besides the shoe in question. And so in order to start to really understand this kind of statistical question, the proposed activities here are to collect footwear data from populations, both those populations interacting with law enforcement and the general population in some area. And so over here on the right, you see a prototype of a device being developed at University of Nebraska, which when you walk across it, captures an image, both of the underside of the tread and side view of the shoe in order to be able to log distributions of shoes passing on a sidewalk. And the goal is to also assess how that distribution of class characteristics changes over time and across different locales. So the potential impact here, again, is to really develop methods to support random match probability calculations for footwear class characteristics and establish differences among different reference populations and understand how those class characteristic frequencies change over time or change depending on what locale you're assessing evidence in. The final project here is again focused on statistical and algorithmic approaches to shoe print analysis. So during CSAFE 1, we've developed semi-automated score-based techniques which look at features extracted from images of evidence and assess probability of match relative to calibrated likelihoods. And we will continue to extend those. In particular, one area that we are focusing on now is trying to develop general ways to assess quality of evidence. And so the notion is to look at examples of evidence, say shown here on the right, and in one part, obtain crowdsourced expert opinions of the quality of evidence, but also develop algorithmic methods to obtain numerical or objective quantitative metrics of source association for pairwise comparisons. So the approach to doing this is to take a given piece of evidence, match it using these score-based matching techniques in order to understand the reliability of that score-based matching technique, and then see, can we predict the reliability of that score-based matching technique using quality metrics based on features of the image, such as noise, texture, frequency, or other variables, the type of evidence or the substrate where the impression was left. And so in this case, the goal is to create predictive models of that image quality for novel imagery, which we haven't seen before. So being able to predict when models or examiners may be uncertain or unhappy with the quality of evidence. And the potential impact is to inform quality, value, and sufficiency of predictors that can be used to qualify uncertainty or error estimation in source association conclusions. So the final piece I'll talk about here is an ongoing effort across the CSAFE footwear team, as well as additional outside collaborators in law enforcement and at NIST. And here our goal is to assemble a data set of simulated crime scene evidence with known source test impressions. So there are some small amounts of real crime scene evidence available, but without having known source test impressions, known source shoes, it's difficult to make use of this data to actually estimate real statistics. And so we want to sort of build out a set of simulated crime scene evidence, which covers a diverse range of outsole design, sizes, wear patterns, presence of accidentals. The intention is also to span a variety of impression types. So depending on how the evidence is collected, dry or wet impressions, different lifting techniques or chemical enhancement, as well as the substrates on which those impressions are left. And finally, we want to also span the range of source of those impressions, activities which left the impression, kicking, jumping, walking, running, and so on. And the idea here is to really try to prioritize that collection of data in order to have data which is representative of examiner caseloads. That's, of course, what we're interested in understanding. And so if we can do that, that will provide a basis to support many of the different sort of research projects across CSAFE and at other institutions. So this includes questions about understanding impression formation, variability in impressions by a given shoe, repeatability of acquired characteristic appearance in that impression, and this evidence quality assessment. And so in this last point, prioritizing collection of data which is representative of examiner caseloads, I would again say that we're interested in collaborators for many of these goals. So labs or examiners willing to participate in some surveys about how frequently different types of footwear evidence or collection techniques or brand of shoes are encountered in your typical casework, so that we can tailor our data collection efforts to match, in some sense, those things that you see every day. We're also interested in reaching out to examiners who are interested in this exploring of fine-grained proficiency testing to really understand repeatability and reliability of marking of individual racks. And we also have interest in understanding the larger scale statistics, so understanding and correlating retail footwear sales data with distributions of footwear worn by local populations. And so I would encourage anyone present in the audience who has interests or contacts in these areas. We would be super excited to talk to you about that. On the flip side, the resources we can offer. So I'll first mention that CSAFE plans to host a public footwear workshop in the fall, so there'll be more information coming out on that later in the year, but we hope you'll be able to attend there if your interests are in the footwear area. I'll mention we also have periodic webinars and insight publications about the research going on here, and you can find some of these footwear data sets and other resources at the CSAFE website. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop and take any questions or questions to the other panelists.
Thank you, Charles. It looks like there is a comment from Jerry Laporte in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see the chat, but I think it's a question you can answer fairly easily. He's talking about the National Footwear Database Initiative, and I think that's an initiative you've been involved in. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we've been. Is there more detail to the question, or
he just wants to make sure you're aware of that initiative and have the contact information.
Yeah, so I've actually am a member of that, or have been to several of those meetings. We also have folks, Marty Herman and Jacqueline Spear, involved in the CSAFE efforts, who have been part of that working group with Brian McVicker and others. So we're in close touch with them.
Another question in the chat is about the digitizing and categorization of algorithms published, and are they published and available to read? And I think that the answer to that question is also yes, those are on the CSAFE website, forensicstats.org, and available for public consumption there. Do we have other questions from the audience? You can use the Q&A. You can also raise your hand and talk directly with Charles or any of the other footwear researchers from the CSAFE team.
There are no raised hands.
Okay. I think we will take a short pause then if there, oh, I do see a raised hand that just came through. One moment while we get that person.
No, oh.
Roger, did we have a question come through?
Ruben raised their hand and then did not want to speak.
Okay.
There's a question in the Q&A channel. It's not a question. This is from Samantha Heisey. Not a question, but I am the test coordinator for footwear PTs at CTS and would be happy to share our research. Excellent.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you, Samantha. We'll be in touch. I think that was it.
Okay, if that is all for now, we will take a, I think we can take a very short break. The next presentation is Bloodstain Pattern Analysis by Dr. Hal Stern from University of California, Irvine. That presentation will begin at 11:30 Central. So we'll take a 15-minute pause at this point and be back at 11:30 with Dr. Hal Stern's presentation on bloodstain pattern analysis.